Hello, and welcome to another season of the Storied Arcs podcast. I am your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And today we are doing our intro episode, which is sometimes called a zero episode or a creator spotlight. And we have not had to do this in a while, but the first time we cover a publisher, we cover the publisher. So we'll be doing that today for IDW. This is amazingly the first true IDW book we've done.
It's the first real IDW book, yeah.
Right. And then we'll be getting into the work, which is Golgotha Motor Mountain. And it's sizable creator team. It's got, for 4 or 5 issue series, it's got 2 writers, artist, colorist, letterer. So
and
there's a lot to talk about.
And a backup art. Yeah. So there's a lot happening here. But right, Mike just said this is our first true IDW book. So if you were to go all the way back into the archives, when Mike and I discussed The Underwater Welder by Jeff Lemire, that book was published initially on Top Shelf, which was, it used to be its own independent publisher. But I want to say back in maybe about 10 years ago or something like that, maybe a little less than that, they were acquired by IDW. IDW itself formed as a publisher in 1999. I believe they formed out of Wildstorm, which came out of Image, which was Jim Lee's studio. We talked about them when we talked about Ex Machina. Wildstorm was initially Jim Lee's studio at Image, when it eventually sold to DC and got folded into DC, Vertigo. All those books kind of meshed together. But the original founders for IDW, I believe, came out of working at Wildstorm. And the idea was to, I believe, form like a kind of multimedia, multi-platform kind of publishing company, with the idea of developing things across like multiple tracks. Something that I think maybe they went away from, or actually maybe not. I don't know. When you hear what their first comic is, the first comic published by IDW was 30 Days of Night, which I think most people know as a movie. I think fairly successful vampire movie. Is that Josh Hartnett in that, I think?
Oh boy. That was one that I slept on at the time.
Yeah. I'm not a big horror vampire person, but 30 Days and Night.
But I do remember it. I mean, anyone who was alive remembers it. It was that.
Yeah. So I mean, that book came out in 2002. It was by Steve Nillis and Ben Temple-Smith. So companies founded 1999, first comic 2002. That movie came out in the early aughts, right? Maybe late aughts. Things happen very quickly in terms of kind of them getting their books out there, and also having deals in place to get them adapted. And so much of what IDW, especially in the early days, and even now, a lot of what they're known for is either horror books or licensed properties. They're
really sneaky about licensed properties. Like there's so many books that I don't realize are IDW.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So if you see a comic out there that's based on an older TV show, a video game, a TV show that you would like a non-genre television show, like there are. They had
CSI, right?
Yeah, CSI. They did seasons 3 and 4 of Jericho. I don't know if you ever watched Jericho, the Skeet Ulrich show. It ran for 2 seasons. It's actually pretty good.
I know, but after watching Firefly years after it went off the air, I can't take the upfront disappointment of knowing I'm going to fall in love with this thing and then it'll be over and gone.
Well, yes, it will be gone, but Jericho, the official story of Jericho 3 and 4 were finished in comics, much like the same thing happened with Firefly. I was just going to mention the Buffyverse. Those are, I want to say IDW had, they at least had Angel, which is a spinoff of Buffy back in the day. Now all that stuff's over at Boom, but their Star Trek universe, they've had Star Trek for a long time. And if you're a Trekker, if you're a big Star Trek fan, you definitely should be into these Star Trek books because they are super, super popular. And the people I know who are into Trek and read the comics really, really like what IDW has done.
It's a very rewarding experience as a fan base to be a Star Trek person right now.
Yeah. Right now you're eating good with the stuff on Paramount Plus and all that.
Oh yeah.
Obviously
and brief shout out to this, will age, but this will always be true. The current run of Star Trek issue 25 was art and cover and variant cover, all done by a friend of the podcast, Liana Kangas. So just want to give them a shout out whenever we can.
Yeah.
Beautiful issue. I was not even reading the Star Trek, but I saw their name on the book, and I was like, well, every comic is someone's first, right? I was like, maybe I'll fall in love with this Star Trek series. I thought it was a solid issue, but I was like, I don't know if it can dethrone anything in my...
Yeah. Well, and IDW, for having all these licensed properties, like, they have been really good stewards with them. Like, if you're a My Little Pony fan, they've done a lot of great stuff, especially with that property's resurgence in the past 10, 15 years, as like an actual, like a real property with like the Friendship is Magic stuff and all that. They've had
Sonic the Hedgehog has to be paying dividends, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. They have TMNT, and they ushered that through, and had a great run, and it just restarted very recently under kind of the overwatch of writer Jason Aaron, and that's been a great relaunch. All of those titles there. They've had Doctor Who here in America, tons of video game ties. I think like Assassin's Creed and things like that. They have the Godzilla franchise, and they've done, especially very recently, in the past 5 or 6 years, they've done some really, really cool stuff with Godzilla. And they're just announcing new stuff right now about, they've reprinted older stuff. They have these great one shots or mini series. Just
shout out to another friend of the podcast, did a Godzilla one shot, was Rosie Knight.
Yeah, Rosie Knight did. They did a graphic, kind of their own graphic novel there. So these are properties that are out. They have Judge Dredd in America. Judge Dredd being one of the the out of 2000 AD over in the UK. So they've done very well about these franchises. Now the licensed franchises that I'm most familiar with coming out of IDW were the Hasbro licensed Transformers and G.I. Joe. They picked those up. They started at Marvel into the 90s, and then kind of in the 90s there, they went to Image, Devil's Due, kind of lost time there. When IDW picked up those franchises, they took them and did legitimately some of the best comic work of the past 25 years. They did a very smart thing. They restarted the original G.I. Joe, Real American Hero, that went 155 issues at Marvel. They brought back Larry Hama, picked it up right back at 156, all the way to 300, which is why when Image Skybound picked up the Hasbro license from IDW, they understood it and did the exact same thing. They picked it up at 301 again with Larry Hama, but they also started their own canon for both Transformers and G.I. Joe, and both those are incredible. The Transformers books are so good, and I know there are people who will listen to this and think that sounds crazy, but the Transformers books were incredible from IDW. So when they had and have these licenses, they do right by them. But I think they've had some issues, I think, coming out of the pandemic, coming out of 2020, because they lost the Hasbro license. They still have Turtles, they still have Star Trek, they still have the Godzilla stuff, but there are some things that you would think that they were so acclaimed with, especially some of those Transformers runs. They were so acclaimed and so lauded critically. It is kind of, I don't know, maybe a little dicey in terms of more recently haven't, that maybe hadn't put the resources in to some of those books, because coming into the late aughts, kind of early 2010s, so 10-ish years after the company is founded, they started hitting kind of like banger after banger. My favorite IDW property, I got a couple. Favorite original IDW property is Lock and Joe Hill and Gabriel Rodriguez.
Oh, sure. I think some of the ones, they have so many that pique my interest, but I don't have the energy or bandwidth to reach out. But one of my favorite movies as a kid was Rocketeer.
Yeah, they have. Yep, and they have the
Rocketeer, and I'm like, oh my gosh, me as a child would have said take my money, any amount of money you want. Please keep telling me the Rocketeer stories.
And they have, and again, another franchise I think they've done very well by they reprinted the classic original Dave Stevens stories, the creator of The Rocketeer, and they've continued them recently under writer artist Stephen Mooney, who has a relationship with IDW. They printed out, they published his Half-Past Danger series, which is a series I mentioned a number of times. It's a World War II story with dinosaurs. It's super weird, super fun. But he has that kind of period sense, Stephen Mooney does, and he has applied that to The Rocketeer, and those stories have been really, really good. There have been a couple, 3 maybe miniseries very, very recently. I think like 4 miniseries that they've done, and have just been super, super fun. So yeah, if you're into The Rocketeer, and I'm with you, that Rocketeer movie is wildly underrated. I think maybe it had a little too much. I remember loving it as a kid and finding out that it wasn't beloved later on and being shocked by it.
It was devastating, and I've been afraid to rewatch it in case it doesn't live up to my. Because to me, that was like, I would imagine the thrill that, I don't know, an 8 to 10-year-old got watching Iron Man 1 in a theater, if you happen to be that young when that movie came out. That was me watching The Rocketeer at about, middle elementary age and just being like, so this guy just like built this stuff and can fly around and be a superhero. That is awesome. Like, I think it's same vibes, same hype.
I will say I watched it relative because it's on Disney Plus. The Rocketeer is. I have fired it up and I've watched it a couple of times, and there are parts that still like I still love it. It's still really, really good, and it is great to go back and you realize that like that cast is stacked full of people.
How do you the fall from grace though from being James Bond to being a Nazi villain?
But
Timothy Dalton.
He's playing off that. I believe he's playing off that stereotype because he's supposed to be playing this very suave, very debonair British actor, right?
Oh, yeah.
So he's trading off of having been Bond to then turn and be the bad guy. So they're using that, but.
And I did like his Bond, to be clear, and he didn't lose it through any fault of his own. Albert Broccoli died. He had nothing to do with that. Obviously.
Those movies were bad. But the rest of that Rocketeer cast is stacked. Like Marco Martindale's in that, like 20 some odd years because she comes like a named actor. But that's just another, I think, instance of showing that the people at IDW, like they know how to handle these licensed properties. They get people in there who clearly are fans. Like if you read the current stuff, or the more recent stuff in the past 3 or 4 years, the stuff written by Stephen Mooney, the Rocketeer stuff, you get a sense that like this guy loves the character, that he loves the comic. I'm sure these were influences with them. And so I think IDW gets that when they work with some of these properties like a Godzilla or a Star Trek or whatever it is. They get people in here that know these properties and know the history and care about it, really do, and want to shepherd it well to tell new canonical stories. And so they do a great deal with that. But, even beyond that, their original stories, which, Golgotha Motor Mountain is an original story for them. They just had one of the biggest, most recent hits with Patrick Horvath's Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees.
Oh, yeah.
That's and that's getting a sequel now because that was such an unexpected major hit. Scott Snyder has his Dark Spaces anthology, which is kind of those are books kind of exploring people's fear of the unknown. That's had 3 or 4 different series. Again, it's an anthology book that's there. They also published the Parker books that were written and drawn by, or adapted and drawn by Darwin Cook off the Richard Stark, Donald Westlake novels characters. So, they have a strong library of original stories. And also, again, if there's some sort of licensed property out there that you're like, I bet that doesn't have a comic book adaptation. There's no way someone would have done that. There's a decent chance.
Hold my beer.
There's a decent chance IDW's on it, and there's a pretty good chance that it might be pretty good because a lot of those extensions, those like whether we're talking about, like I mentioned, like a show like Jericho or NCIS or 24 or any of the video game adaptations, like as far as I know from the ones I've read, they are considered canonical stories. So if you are a fan of, let's say, 24. And you have not read any of the comic books are like official stories of that world, of the character of Jack Bauer and his world. Just like I mentioned, those Jericho stories, those are what the people who created Jericho consider seasons 3 and 5. That's the extension and finish of the show. So if you love these stories and love these kind of things, and I think Star Trek has got this crazy history, because obviously it goes on for so long, of canonical stories and characters. The comics are a part of that, just as the TV shows are. And, if we ever get another Star Trek movie, it'll all be as well. But it's all one story. So these aren't just random. We're not just using the brand name of whatever IP to get fans of that in. Like, these are stories that are a part of those worlds. So if you are a fan of them and you want that kind of fuller, richer experience, IDW's probably got a book for you. And like I said, it's probably not going to be bad. It's going to be pretty good, because the people writing those stories are fans of that world just like you are. So yeah, it's an interesting niche they found themselves in. But as I mentioned, in the last couple of years, it seems like I don't know if it's a financial thing or whatnot, and it could be coming out of the pandemic, but they've lost a number of licenses. I mentioned the big one in my mind was Hasbro, or at least they lost G.I. Joe and Transformers. They lost those to Image Skybound. They used to also publish a handful of Disney comics. Now, that makes sense. When Disney bought Marvel, that's probably going to go back to them. But they also still, for a while, even after that, they had Marvel's all ages storylines, which were they had a Star Wars line that was called Star Wars Adventures, and they had a Marvel line that it was Marvel Action or something like that. But they were specifically the all ages line. And they still publish those even after Disney bought Marvel. But in recent years, they've lost both of those as well too. Those have gone. I think I'm pretty sure Star Wars. Actually, both of them may have gone back to Dark Horse, because Dark Horse obviously had Star Wars way back in the day before Marvel did. So they've had some of these fairly, I don't want to say profitable or successful, but like at least well known, licenses that they've lost recently. And as we're recording this a few months back from where we are now in February 2025, they just did a whole logo rebrand, and they're kind of putting themselves back out there to, I think, kind of get their properties, I think, in work for adaptation and in other medium and all that. I think the logo looks bad. No offense to anyone who worked at IDW. I'm sure they put a lot of work and a lot of thought into it. But before it was very generic, a block IDW, but you recognized it. You saw it. It was very easy and clear to read on the spine of a book. They got this new IDW that, like, you can look it up, and I don't know, when I saw it a few months back when they announced it, the people that I know follow comics, everyone kind of looked at it and was like, huh? Like, that was kind of the reaction. So, it is what it is, but IDW is out there. They said they still have some really good books, but it's the licensed stuff that gets most of the shine. And I guess that's why, for me, the book that we're covering this season, Golgotha Motor Mountain here, I missed it, because I'm not really checking out IDW for their original stuff, which I think is why I think something that you and I've talked about, maybe, I don't know if we've talked about it on mic, but Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees, that Patrick Horvath book, which is a book that I super love, and it's fantastic. Totally missed it when it first came out, when it first released, because I'm not.
You're the one who got to impress Patrick Horvath by approaching him with a first print, though. Yeah,
it was your first printing of issue 1, because it
was an impulse grab for me. I saw the cover art and I was like, I have to know what this is. It's like a cute teddy bear dragging a bloody bag across the. I was like, I just have to know what's in it for $4 or whatever. I'm willing to scratch that curiosity.
But yeah, there are. It is. I'm checking it, like, for me, they're so associated with those licensed properties, a lot of which that I love. Like, I wasn't a huge Turtles reader. I read some here off and on, but when they announced kind of their relaunch, written by Jason Aaron and bringing these different artists in, like, I've been reading the Turtle stuff, and I think it's been great. Even though I hadn't been reading for the previous 300 some odd issues that IDW had. So yeah, a book like this can sometimes kind of escape my eye here. But this is one that you brought, I think, to the table here for us for you and I to talk about here. So I guess we can kind of go into how I found it because you said read this book. So how did you come across the book?
Well, so I came across it because, I mean, if you are just browsing the comic shop and just truly you're not looking for a book, you are just looking, the art and colors on this book will just jump out and smack you. And honestly, the big monster on the cover reminded me a lot of which one was that in the Apocalyptic trilogy, where they all merge into one huge person? Is that Cognetic? They turn into a big blob that looks a lot like that.
Well, that was mimetic. Cognetic was the actually, it was actually in both of them in different ways.
Okay,
that happened in different ways in both those books.
But either way, I saw that.
Now that you said, I can see it.
Yeah, and it made me pause and be like, "Wait, is that a Tynion property?" And then I looked down at the creators. I was like, Matthew Erman, don't know him. Lonnie Nadler, don't know him. Robbi Rodriguez, and then you look at the art and the colors, even though I don't think he did the colors here, but it just is like so much Robbi essence to it that, and I do know Robbi from Spider-Gwen and other Marvel properties, but I mostly knew him as a cover artist, not an interior artist. Which he kind of bulked at last time. I had him sign this series, and I said, most of what I have from you is covers. This is, I think, the first book I have from you that is an interior. Robbi, incredibly nice guy, by the way, was like, "Oh, I mostly do interiors." I was like, "Yeah, I'm sure these days you do. I just, I think he got started doing covers, right? Or am I totally crazy?" Well, let's get into it. Let's go to the creators. I should do the synopsis first.
Yeah, let's get into the book. Let's talk about this book's about here. Let's, because it's kind of a wild premise
with a lot of great comps and stuff. But we'll read the synopsis. This is from IDW's website. It says, "Meet the Damnage brothers," which is spelled DAMN. Which just one sentence already gives you a flavor already.
Yeah.
But it goes on. Meth cookers by trade and mutant-killing road warriors by necessity in this graphic novel thriller. When a derelict chunk of a passing interstellar rock rains down on Elwood and Vernon Damnage's meth lab in Golgotha Knob, Kentucky, their lives are turned into a body horror. That's a massive run-on. Continuing. Still needing to make their deliveries to the buyers, mutations or not, they set off down Golgotha Knob, only to be beset on all sides by crazy addicts, cannibal police, mutated neo-Nazis. It doesn't matter what waits at the bottom of Golgotha Knob for the Damnage brothers, because they must ride through a cosmic hell that they're unlikely to survive. But if these brothers do survive, they'll finally have made enough money to start over in the beautiful utopia that is Cincinnati. And for listeners who don't know, because I do know we have genuinely listeners all over the world, we are both based out of Cincinnati, and so this was the 1-2 punch. I saw Robbi Rod. I don't like in a comic shop flipping through the pages of a book until I'm sure that I'm pretty interested in it. So I pulled out my phone, Googled the book, got the synopsis from issue 1, and I was like, Robbi Rodriguez, Cincinnati, I'm in. And it's that easy, folks. Cincinnatians, I think, more than other cities our size, get an outsized delight in being mentioned in pop culture or used as a movie set or something like that. There is a disproportionate pride, I think, in this. Like, I have friends that are in Pittsburgh. Chris Nolan used Pittsburgh a lot for shooting his Dark Knight movies, and they're kind of like, yeah, that's cool. Like, Cincinnatians would have plaques. Like, we would have an actual Batman statue at Fountain Square.
We do have the Hall of Justice here.
We better see it in this Superman movie.
But I wonder if some of that goes back to the Mark Twain quote, which may or may not be apocryphal, but the one that's attributed to him. But yeah, there is something about and we will definitely get into the idea of in this book, the literal idea of Cincinnati and what that represents for our characters. We should say real quick, I didn't mention, I skipped over that. This is a 4-issue series from IDW. It was published from March to July of 2024, and the trade came out in December 2024. So this is a relatively recent, this book here, for us to come through. But the kind of the elevator pitch, that there are a couple of them. I think both Matthew Erman and Lonnie Nadler, the two co-writers, have given various pitches about what this book is, and you can get a little bit from what Mike read there in that synopsis that we're dealing with a real vibe, a real place, a real idea, kind of in rural Kentucky. But the idea, once like a piece of space junk detritus comes down, and we're talking about mutants and cannibals and weird things like that, you know that there's something weird going on here. But there were a couple descriptions of this book that I think were funny. I think Matthew Erman gave this one when he called it Kentucky Fried Cthulhu. And I think really Lonnie Nadler said Breaking Bad meets Lovecraft Country. So yeah,
rose by any other name. It's two ways of saying the same thing.
But the idea that we're talking about this supernatural kind of body horror, demon horror type thing, just set in on the hilltops in rural Kentucky. So yeah, it's a strange and odd mix, but I think the thing that I think both you and I gravitate to, that we'll definitely get into, is kind of what this represents and what the idea of the mutations and the space rock and getting out and all that, what it's all a larger metaphor for. Whether or not it totally lands is something we'll discuss, but the idea of what this cosmic body horror story is trying to say about the area and the world and the people, I think that's something that we find interesting.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's definitely an interesting premise. It is an odd length series for how much it's trying to throw together here. It's not a huge cast of characters.
There's a lot of stuff going on though. Yeah.
But for
4 issues.
For such a big premise, when I think 4 issues, right or wrong, probably I'm wrong about this. When I think 4 issues, I think of like the slice of life type stories where you don't really have to do world building. It's like a little intimate.
You're not totally off base, but you are right, just in the sense that 4 issues is not a lot of time when world building is when you're saying and showing the reader that world building is a critical part of what you're trying to do. You don't have a lot of runway when you only have 4 issues, and so it's a tough ask, and there's a lot going on, and a lot of pieces they have to try to set up in this story that they haven't given them a lot of space to do that with. So it's a little unusual. I think had this been like 6 issues with like the same amount of material, I think you could have seen that like pretty easily. At least I think I could have. It would have worked well without much padding, just to kind of take what they have and just give it a little more room to breathe with a couple extra issues. But 4 is what we got, and this is the story that they're trying to tell.
Especially when you factor in it is a good value. It is a $5.99 book. It's a little thicker, per issue. But it includes a backup in-world manga, which is just the wildest combination. You go from like all of these vivid colors to a black and white story told by someone in the world.
It is a manga written and drawn by someone who a former resident of the fictional town. It's levels and levels of meta there, but you're right. The issues are a little bigger, a little more padded, so there is a little more story there. But still, again, 4 issues is still a lot to get through, especially when you have these things like the in-world manga, the story within a story, that kind of thing. There, we've already mentioned. We'll get into the creative team here. We already mentioned the 2 writers, Matthew Erman and Lonnie Nadler. Matthew Erman, I believe, is from the Columbus, Ohio area, and I've read some interviews with him about this, that a lot of the settings, the character names, the idea, I think came from his experience spending his summers in rural Kentucky with his extended family. Like I believe he said that Vernon and Elwood, the names of the brothers, who the two characters here, I believe he said that was his grandfather and his grandfather's brother's names. So he named them after them. The idea that they lived on kind of this knob hill in rural Kentucky, that's where the setting is. And so this idea, I think a lot of the setting and the feel comes from what his experience was. And I think him and Lonnie Nadler then kind of fleshed out what the overall kind of cosmic stories. We obviously mentioned Robbi Rodriguez. He's the artist there. His colorist here is Mariss Louise. A lot of Robbi's work is colored by Rico Renzi, like coming from Spider-Gun and whatnot. Right. So it's kind of cool to see him work with someone else here, bring a little different vibe, a little different feel, but still be very much a Robbi Rodriguez.
Yeah, very the letterer, like, heavy on neon. Like, how would you describe it? I mean,
yes, it's loud. Yeah, it's loud.
Yes.
His art style has a frenetic nature to it. There's this propulsion to it.
It's a little like punk rock, right?
Yeah, a little bit there. And so his colors always seem to reflect that, whether he said he's coloring his own stuff, working with someone like Rico or working with Mariss Louise here on this book, there's still a sense that you feel that this is still what his art is. I was saying the letter for this book is he's guy who's become, we'll probably see his name a lot more if we're doing more and more recent books. Hassan Otsmane-Elhaou, who we mentioned first a few seasons back on Time Before Time. And he is someone who has become one of the best letters and one of the top letters kind of in the game in the past like 3 or 4 years. We also mentioned the backup story. Those are drawn by, I believe it's a Croatian name. If it's not, very, very sorry to this man and his family. But his name is Nikola Cizmesija. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. It is one of those names that is in a Cyrillic alphabet, but then just gets translated to a Western alphabet because the letters look the same. And so you end up with a whole bunch of consonants together that shouldn't go together, and you don't know how they're pronounced. But I listened to a couple pronunciation guides, and I think Cizmesija is what it is, but he is drawing those in-world backup stories, those manga stories. So that's our team right here. And we'll get into a little bit of what they've done and kind of other works they have. We'll start with Matthew Erman. I mentioned he's a Columbus native. He has kind of two kind of well-known-ish works, I guess, over at kind of a lot of indie publishers. Most of his stuff is going to be like, he doesn't have Marvel and DC stuff. He's got stuff at Vault Comics, this book called Witch Blood, and this book called Long Lost. One was at Vault, one was at Scout Comics. Both those were with Lisa Sterl. He has a book called Loving Ohio. He did with artist Sam Beck. That was on Dark Horse. That was an original graphic novel. And you already mentioned their name earlier, Liana Congas. He has a book with them at Mad Cave called Mariko Between Worlds. That's another original graphic novel. So this is someone who works, outside of the big two, typically. He's got these books that have some sense of, a lot of them have maybe a supernatural feel or an otherworldly kind of feel to them. But at least, like, I think Mariko Between Worlds and Loving Ohio, both are kind of set in the real world, have a real world setting basis, much like the book we're reading here. So again, not the most expansive, but if you're someone out there looking for an offbeat, a different kind of comic vibe, something outside of the big two, I think Erman's works are one you can look up. His co-writer Lonnie Nadler does have a lot more big two experience, specifically at Marvel. A few years back, right before, so this is like 2018, 2019, right before the X Office went through their relaunch, or their soft relaunch into what became the Krakoan era, led by Jonathan Hickman. Their kind of last big X-Men event before that was called Age of X-Man, which was kind of a throwback to Age of Apocalypse in the mid 90s, and Lonnie Nadler was kind of big involved in that, writing some of those titles and tie-ins and kind of just in general just being really involved in that storyline, writing some of the various X books and some also like tie-in books, things, because it affected different parts of the Marvel universe. So that's kind of his most well-known kind of Marvel work there. He has a book that I kind of want to check out that I haven't, that has similar kind of horror supernatural vibes, I think, to Golgotha Motor Mountain here. It's called The Sickness. It was published by Uncivilized Books, which is, I guess, a super indie small press. But he did that book with an artist, Jenny Cha. And again, it sounds like it has a real kind of similar feel to the book we're talking about here. So that's one I want to go and check out. And when you go through Nadler's, his kind of comics resume, he has a lot of books where he's co-written with Zach Thompson. Zach Thompson is a writer who I've read a handful of stuff in at like Image and Boom and things like that. But I think what it shows is that he does a lot of co-writing on comics, something he's done a lot before. So I think it's experience he has bringing in. And so when he's paired with someone like Matthew Erman, who I don't think has co-written a lot there, he's someone who's familiar and comfortable working in this space and kind of knows how to direct and get a project done and knows how to collaborate in that way.
Well, I'm curious if you went to his website and see how he refers to himself.
No, I did not.
Okay, so he's got he both refers to himself as a writer and as a narrative director. Okay, and so I suspect as a co-writer he would be taking on that role of narrative director. You know, almost like, you know, the producer director role where it's, you know, the other guy's story, but you are helping map it. You say, oh, you want to drop this here, you want to plot this here. You know, you kind of help with the 10,000 foot view, make sure the setups and payoffs are all right.
And that makes a ton of sense. You mentioned that so much of the DNA of this story comes from Matthew Erman's experience. The characters, the setting, the vibe, the feel, all that. So that could make sense that he brings the specifics, and then Nadler's here to help. Yeah, you're right. Kind of help him with the construction, help him with put the building blocks in place of, you have these pieces here, let me help you set them up. That would make a ton of sense. And it seems like that's something that Nadler has done a lot of, because you see him as a co-writing credit on a ton of different on a ton of different books. And so maybe having that guiding hand there to help Erman work through and get that story across, I think it helps. And if that's the, you know, if that's the dynamic in terms of what co-writing means, I think that stuff is great. That you can have someone bring in the specifics, and here's the DNA of the story, and then someone else to come in and help guide what the storytelling is going to be. So I think that's great, and that I think it's interesting that he kind of builds himself that way, and it makes a lot of sense again when you see what his credits are and how many things he has co-written.
Yeah, I mean, he also, you know, on his contact form, you know, which I end up using a lot of these creators' contact forms to try to get them on the podcast. Have not reached out yet, but you know, he says he's looking for new writing opportunities, which I think is a very fluid, flexible way of saying, you know, whatever kind of co-writing, you know, you can give me, like, here's the story, please write it out for us, or
do you have an idea?
Do you have an idea?
Yeah, can I help you with something? Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. So I guess the biggest name on this book, I think it's the one obviously that drew you to it. And when you mentioned this book to me, it was one that would have grabbed me immediately, and that's Robbi Rodriguez. I know you and I are both huge fans of his art. I know plenty of people that may not be an art subjective thing, but I know I love anytime I see a cover by him. If his name is on a book that he's doing the interiors on, I'm going to pick it up. Obviously, the first line of his comic resume is he co-created Spider-Gwen. One of the biggest new characters in the past. Oh, gee, I guess Spider-Gwen's like 10 years old now as we hit 2025. Jesus.
Oh my gosh.
But he co-created Spider-Gwen / Spider-Woman / Ghost Spider, Gwen Stacy of Earth 65. Co-created her with Jason Latour for the original Spider-Verse event back in 2014, 2015. And I mean, you know, they did the original one shot, which was Edge of Spider-Verse #2. That was her first appearance. Then she appears in the main Spider-Verse crossover. Then she gets her first volume of stories, which is I think 5 or 6 issues, which was Latour writing, Robbi Rodriguez on interior art, and Enrico Renzi on color. And then that did well, and so she got another series new number one, of course, that went for 34, 35 issues, something like that, crossed over with Miles and crossed over with into the main universe with the Spider Women crossover with Jessica Drew and Silk. She just became legitimately one of those popular characters Marvel has produced. And a huge part of that, like, I believe 90% of her appeal is that she looked cool. Like, that was it.
100%. Certainly into the Spider-Verse movie, which, pulls heavily.
And she's only in that because she was hugely popular coming out of the comic. That's why you use these characters. Like, there's a small part of it that's like, oh, it's a different take on the Spider-Man idea. Like, oh, Gwen Stacy lived, Peter Parker died, and that's cool. And that's like a 10% part of why the character was interesting and caught on. The rest is because she has the hoodie and it's cool, and the colors are white and black with these teal and magenta accent, and like, that's all Robbi Rodriguez's work, and I think that's part of.
Had Robbi been given Spider Pig or Spider Ham, who knows? Peter Porker could have been the most popular character.
But here's the thing, I don't think it would have, because Spider Ham already exists. They were given a new character, a new idea, and to start from, and I think part of why some of these characters hit like that, because there was a similar-ish formula with Miles. Yes, on some hand, there's a cool idea that when Miles was introduced in the original Ultimate Universe, he was a kid again. He was younger than Peter when Peter got bitten. I think Miles was supposed to be 13 when he got bitten. And yeah, there's cool that he's a Black Puerto Rican kid, taking on the mantle now and all this. A large part also was that he had a cooler suit than Peter did. And when he first showed up in the 616 universe and interacted with all the other heroes who knew Peter Parker Spider-Man, every single one of them was like, hey man, you got a cool suit. Because he was wearing the black suit with the red. It just visually, comics had it's so important. The character pops off the page, and yes, there's a cool backstory, but if it looks cool and it's drawn well, it's going to draw people to it. And that is such a massive part of why Spider-Gwen blew up the way she did. And I think that completely goes to Robbi Rodriguez and what that design was, and what him and Jason Latour did, and what the three of them, along with Rico Renzi there, was able to do on that series, and why it got to run so long. And then, when she gets put into the Spider-Verse movies, and now more people see her, she's in that. Her costume looks like it is in the comic, because obviously they want to stay faithful to that, but also because that's what people recognize. You have to have the hood. You have to have the color scheme. And you know what? As we're recording this right now, the latest animated Spider-Man on Disney Plus is Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, really which is, again, multiversal take on the MCU Spider-Man. But the showrunner for that and head writer, Jeff Trammell, right after the season finale aired for that season 1, he teased season 2, and Gwen Stacy is going to be in season 2. And he teased the design, because she's also going to be Spider-Gwen or Ghost Spider, or whatever they're going to call her. And yes, it's a different take in terms of what she's wearing, but you know what? The elements are still there. The elements that Robbi Rodriguez put in, having the hood, things like you, whenever you see that, the only thought of a spider person is Spider-Gwen. That's it. It's an iconic silhouette for that character, and that comes from his work. And, I think when you can have something like that on your resume, I mean, to know that you help create what has become an iconic character, an iconic look of a character. I mean, I can't imagine something cooler than that, And I hope to God he never gets tired of signing Spider-Gwen or drawing Spider-Gwen, because he's going to be doing it his whole life. I know, artists can be different about, creatives can be iffy on things like that, because obviously they're always working on something else. They always want you to check out what's coming new. But I in my dealings, in the number of times I've met Robbi at shows, which at this point is like 3 or 4 shows I've seen him
twice for me, so it's got to be double that for you.
He's always been cool with it. I think he knows someone has always got an issue of Spider-Gwen that he wants them to sign. He's always going to get commissions to draw it. But it's one of those things that it's the first line of his comic resume that he co-created this character, and his design made her iconic. And I think that's so cool. But again, he has done a bunch of other stuff as well. He's got a bunch of kind of short runs, like story arc length runs at DC. Some characters I think that make a lot more sense for his style, like he's done Batgirl or Batgirls recently. Or like Birds of Prey recently as well. He's also done some Nightwing. I think he's done a little bit on Detective and all that. He has a really cool book that came out I think it was his first regular series. I guess it was a miniseries after Spider-Gwen ended. It was on DC Vertigo, the end of Vertigo 1.0 back at DC. So it would, if they reprinted, it'd be back on Vertigo now. It's called Goddess Mode. He did that with writer Zoe Quinn, and Rico was on colors again. It's one of the old Vertigo titles. It's a book that I think if people read it now will feel more prescient, because it was kind of about like an AI that runs society and like the hidden world beneath it and what the resistance and revolution is against that. It's got kind of a gamer feel to it and all that. But I think it's a book that if I were to go back to, if I were to pull it out of the long box and read it again, I think it'd feel more prescient. But it's a pretty cool book. It's a pretty cool idea. DC Vertigo book. And it's a book that I wonder if when Vertigo comes back fully and they start publishing again, that they would go back and reprint and get back out there. Because again, it was one of the kind of the last books that had the original DC Vertigo labeling on it, and maybe got lost in the shuffle a little bit. But it's a cool book and a cool idea. He's also had some work over at Valiant, The Harbinger over at Valiant. Again, Valiant, long-running indie publisher with their own interconnected superhero universe.
We've never covered anything on Valiant,
and I have never read any of it. But The Harbinger, Faith, Bloodshot, I think, Ninjak, like this whole interconnected universe. Never read any of it, but it's got its fans. He had a run on The Harbinger with co-writers Jackson Lanzing and Colin Kelly, the writing team of them, guys who have again blown up, but they've done work at Star Trek, plenty of work at Marvel and DC as well. Again, with Rico on colors there.
It surprises me that you've not just incidentally read something from Valiant, because
you know what?
There are two creators who I followed them and ended up reading Valiant. But like, I was following the creator. I wasn't like, this is a Valiant book. But Jeff Lemire did a run on Bloodshot, a very short run that I knew like the basic premise of the character, and I enjoyed it in the Jeff Lemire-ness of it. But I never was like, let me go read more Bloodshot. And then I followed Matt Kent over to Exo Man of War, which I think
that was the other big one I forgot, right? when I was listening. When I was listening to some of the heroes, that was a big one I forgot. Exo Man of War, but it never really crossed my path. So I don't know what it's like. I don't know. It is not a statement of quality or anything about it. I
didn't hear anything snobbish about it. But there is also that like you only have so much time to read. You only have so many dollars to spend. You only have so many boxes that can be filled. Like, you have to draw a line somewhere.
Yeah, and I don't have a history with Valiant, because I think the people that have been into it have been doing it for a while and they love those characters, and they've been there with some of the reboots and refreshes and things like that. So but it's a thriving universe of characters and a publisher that if you're in it, you're in it. And, I think that's great. I want that stuff to exist, whether or not I read it or not. But before we move off Robbi and his work, you mentioned it. He also is someone that does a ton of covers. He is someone that I think creators reach out to for cover work, both main covers and variants. I think because there is an audience for his stuff that comes from, I honestly, mainly his work on Spider-Gwen. People see his stuff and they know it, and they know he has a distinctive style. He is someone that I know when I see it, like it's on a cover, like, oh, that's Robbi's work, and I'll go pick it up and see is it just a variant or is it a book he's worked on. But he's someone whose art that I love and enjoy so much that when it's on a cover, like I'm always going to if I see that he's doing variants for something, I will always check them out and see if I don't sub to variants. I don't get like, oh, give me all the variant covers for something like that. I'm very rare that I do that, but he's one of those artists that if I see he's doing a run of, like, very recently he did a run of variant covers for the Batgirls series over at DC.
Yeah,
where
very cool.
Yeah, and so, but when I see these doing those, I was like, oh, I'm gonna pay attention to this month and the next coming months, because there's a better than decent chance that at least one of those covers I'm really gonna like, and I'm gonna want to make sure I order that one and get that one. So when I see his name, that he's doing variants for a series, so I'm always gonna check it out. He's an artist that I always want to follow and see what they're doing next. Because I love his interior work. So if he's on another book there, and like I said, this is one that I missed when this book came out last year. This is one that slipped my radar. I'm guessing probably because, again, it was IDW, and that's a little on me in terms of kind of where my focus is on the publishers I look at for like original stories. But Robbi's an artist that I love to see. I love his work. There's something about it. I mentioned, we'll definitely talk about this more next week, but there's a frenetic energy to the way he draws. That I think kind of puts you on edge, that it propels, it feels like it propels action forward. And I kind of love that feeling of everything kind of moving in that way. There's a propulsion that you can't stop. Like you're on a train, you're going down a hill and roller coaster. Everything's going forward there. And I love that with the style and the way that he gets colored. Again, obviously Rico Renzi is his colorist that I'm most known for. I see his work with, but seeing what Mariss Louise has done here, someone who's done, we'll talk about her a little bit here, that she's done a lot of, in terms of IDW, her name's all over Star Trek books. So I think she's someone that IDW knows and kind of has in their stable. Also done some work over at like Dark Horse and Boom and all that. In terms of Big Two, she's done a lot of DC work, but really specifically since like 2018-ish. So I think relatively-ish new in terms of the comic space. But again, ton of stuff, ton of work at IDW on these Star Trek books. And I think seeing someone else color Robbi Rodriguez's work, because I think this is the first time I've seen his work interior where it's not been colored by Rico Renzi in terms of the books that I've read that right. Robbi has drawn. I think this is the first one I've read where Rico hasn't colored it, but to have it still feel like a Robbi Rodriguez book, because there are very bright, very loud colors. There is a neon-ish highlighter feel. It's heightened, it's exaggerated. They're colors that don't look natural. Does that seem? Did you know what I'm saying there?
Yes.
They don't seem like of the natural world. And actually, that makes sense for this book as we get into it, that we're talking about alien, supernatural things here. But there is this heightened sense of, like, there is so much of what they did.
There's a reset palette where everything works proportionally through this. Like, it's just like you take the scale and level everything appropriately. So it's not like he's just using one wild color. Everything is wild colored. And like after you start reading it for a while, you kind of get used to it, and you almost stop noticing it in sequential art like this, whereas it always makes a cover pop. When you're going across the wall of shops, which is why this book jumped out at me. By the way, the other variant that we should shout out that's a cross-pollination with this podcast is he did the 3 variants for Eugenic.
Yes, he did.
Which were outstanding.
They were homage,
and each was an homage to
another part of the which is very
2 out of
cool.
3 signed. I really, really want to get the 3rd one. It's just anything with that Happy Time Sloth on it is so hard to get.
It is, but there is. I mean, but I think that's what's interesting about reading this book as someone who has read a lot of Robbi's interior, other artwork, is that that he's working with the different colors here, but it feels, the aesthetic feels right. There are still, it's not colored in the same way as Goddess Mode or Spider-Gwen, but the feel of Robbi's art still comes through, and I think you get what he's trying to get on the page with this colorist there. That I think Mariss Louise does a really great job of capturing that spirit of Robbi's art and having it translate. So that was really cool to see him work with someone else and still get the feel of this is the story he's telling. This feels right for the kind of art style that I'm expecting out of Robbi, and so I think that was very, very cool to see. finally I mentioned the letterer, Hassan Otsmane-Elhaou. We went more on him in terms of what his career is, where it started, what he was doing in comics journalism before becoming, again, one of the best letterers, maybe the best letterer currently in comics. Go back to the Time Before Time Zero episode, and we talked about that book. It was the first time that that Haas's name came up. So seeing his name on this book, again, not surprising because he's a name you're going to see on like every book going forward now. Except Marvel, because Marvel has their own in-house stuff, virtual calligraphy guys. But any kind of indie book, DC book, whatever, you're going to see Haas's name as letterer probably very, 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 very soon, because he has quickly become just one of the top guys out. So yeah, that's our main creative team. I think when it comes to Cizmesija, our backup artist, he is someone he has done a lot of credits to it. I think what's interesting here is that he's trying to mimic the style of a Japanese artist. Like the in-universe manga that he's drawing is drawn by the son of Japanese immigrants to this rural Kentucky town. So he's trying to draw and filter the story through this style. So we're talking like 3-4 levels of like meta-ness here. But it is a really wild choice to have those backups in these issues, which I really honestly can't wait to dive into and kind of suss out how they fit into the story and what they're trying to say about the world that they're in here. So, but yeah, that's our team here for this this hillbilly cosmic sludge Southern Gothic nightmare. Those are a bunch of words come together that they used to describe this book, which really does make a lot of sense if you think about them individually. Maybe not, but once you read this book, you'll see that. Oh yeah, no, I see where all those words are.
I mean, it's almost like they were, just playing with words, came up with that list of words together, and then the whole story just told itself based on that weird cocktail.
There is a word. I agree. There is a world where like they back calculated this based on some random weird ideas, but I do think, and maybe we can tease this conversation a little bit, there is a larger metaphor, and whether they backed in this or this was the kind of front street all the way, there's a larger metaphor for kind of the plight of rural America, specifically in like Appalachian country, rural Kentucky, rural West Virginia, rural Ohio, rural Pennsylvania, this area here. There's a metaphor for a lot of this in terms of what those people are going through, and the idea that like meth is both a literal thing in this story and also like metaphorically represented in this random space rock that falls in, like we get both sides of it. And I think seeing the effects of what happens in this story, what happens to the characters, I think can be read as the effect of what this lifestyle and what some of the choices people make in this part of the country can lead to, and what their hopes and dreams and aspirations can or cannot be, and what they aspired and what they want to have happen versus what is plausible. And it's all wrapped up in this large cosmic, very weird and kind of messed up body horror tale,
Right.
So there are things they're trying to get across through this very outlandish and over the top and sometimes ridiculous kind of storytelling. So yeah, whether or not they worked their way backwards into that, or that was the thing they wanted to explore, and this was the avenue they wanted to go down. Either way, I think there's something there in terms of what kind of message they're trying to get across, or what they want to say about these people. I use that in heavy air quotes, and this part of the world.
Yeah. And I think it's one of those things that I have very mixed feelings about the topic in general, mostly because of, I think this came to popular light with 2016 or 2015, whatever the book Hillbilly Elegy was, which I didn't care for at the time. And then most recently, Pulitzer Prize winning Demon Copperhead, which is...
I think that's what it's called.
It was the 2022 Pulitzer Prize winner, which takes one of my favorite books, David Copperfield by Charles Dickens, basically a one-to-one retelling, but in modern Appalachia, and then dealing with the opioid crisis.
You know what?
No, go ahead.
Sorry. I wonder if a book like this, because this obviously depicts that part of the world and that kind of struggle of people in a very different light than something like Hillbilly Elegy does. I wonder if this book, in a way, is a response to things like Hillbilly Elegy.
That is a very interesting question.
Just taken to the max, you know, because again, as I said, Matthew Erman, one of the co-writers here, grew up in Columbus, but spent he said in interviews, he spent his summers in rural Kentucky with his extended family, grandparents, aunts, uncles, things like that. I think he still has family who lives in this part of the country and part of the world as well. So again, someone that moonlit in this part of the country, much like the author of Hillbilly Elegy, because where that person grew up, you know what? It's about 20 minutes from where I live right now, not rural country. So the idea of kind of visiting it and being a part of it and having that be part of your life experience. So I wonder if this in some way is motivated by a response to that or at least that kind of the germ of an idea, and then taking that and then kind of, again, blowing it out and examining it from this, you know, literally from outer space. But I wonder if that could be part of it, because you're right. There has been this rise of Appalachian chic, I guess. I don't know what we want to call it. This idea of trading on that. Yeah, you know.
So I hear all of these things. Like, I have a friend who works for, did something with AmeriCorps and really developed like a love for the people of Appalachia, and is now working for a nonprofit that like serves the Appalachian people, because feel like they get really bad representation. They very rarely are depicting themselves in pop culture or anything. You know, it's usually like it's like a placeholder for this place is garbage, these people are awful. And you know, I think my understanding of what Hillbilly Elegy was supposed to be about was like, oh, you know, these people are exclusively victims, you know, we should pity them and feel sorry for them. And I think Golgotha Motor Mountain maybe says, like, there is definitely something pitiable here, but people are still definitely responsible for their actions, how they choose to behave, you know, the moral influence that they choose. Like, yes, the scales can be tipped against you in certain ways, but that is not carte blanche to go be whoever, do whatever, you know, be a mutating neo-Nazi.
And I think some of the issue, and I think pushback with them on that is like, okay, well, if the people of Appalachia, they're exclusively victims and they've only been crapped upon, and then none of this is their fault. But then you turn that lens to the Black community in the inner cities, and you say, well,
right,
why aren't they victims? And the same people who defend Hillbilly Elegy would be like, well, no, they're just lazy. You know,
exactly.
They chose. Yes. Look at the choices they make.
Right.
They turn to drugs. They turn to guns. They turn to violence.
I'm trying not to be just the inverse of that. I'm trying to not be just the liberal version of that. I'm like, I want to extend empathy wherever possible, but I also want to have some standard.
And I think that's one thing that I think is that I read into the intent, which is always tough to do, but I do read into the intent of Golgotha Motor Mountain here, is you're right, is that the idea that like these people maybe have been dealt a bad hand and they want to do better. And their way out to doing better is selling meth, because that's a way out. But they're not victims because of that. You don't pity them because of that. They're simply showing the reality of the situation, that we want to do better. We want to get out. We're trying to this, but we don't have a lot of avenues. And there are other avenues, but these guys have chosen to sell meth.
Right.
You know, and so you're still responsible for that. What happens to that? I don't think you're meant to pity any of the characters here. They're not showing them as like, you pity them, maybe you feel empathy for them because you're like, God, that sucks, you know, just in general.
Oh, it's bad. Yeah. I mean,
bad.
Yeah.
But
I don't think anyone's saying like,
you see
it's great there, suck it up. Right.
Yeah. So I do think that seems to be some of the intent, which is why when you mention something like Hillbilly Elegy, I'm thinking like, I wonder if there's a part of him that's a response of like, hey man, I spent time in this place as well. I know these people as well. I'm from that same stock, and I wonder if there was a part of something that like flicked in him that was like, you know what, like let me show you what I know of this and what I feel about this area and what these people go through. I'm now that you said that, I can't stop thinking about this as a response to just not maybe specifically that book, but that the entire genre of using
like the whole movement. Yeah.
It's
not a specific book.
Yeah.
Just this like
because I do think
tide of like, hey, we've been hearing this. How about the complete extreme opposite? And it's like, what if it were anywhere in between? Which is almost always where the truth lies.
And I think Golgotha Motor Mountain is trying to show that they're definitely not they're definitely not saying these are enviable characters. These are characters you're supposed to pity and feel bad for. But I think you are supposed to be able to empathize with their situation and their plight, if not their actions and their choices. I think you can hold both those ideas together. I think that's what this book is challenging readers to do and asking its readers to do. Is to not come down on one side or the other of like, oh, woe are these people, or oh my God, these are terrible people. They deserve what comes to them. It wants you to be somewhere in the middle. It wants you to feel for them in that way, but also be like, dudes, come on.
Right.
Like they want you to feel for them, but also be like, come on, guys, really? They want you to be conflicted like that. So, but yeah, that a little more maybe than we get into normally here, but I think it's the book that is pretty fresh in both of our minds. And so I'm looking forward to next week to really diving into it.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun one. And we will do everything in our power to try to speak to at least one person from this creative team. Yeah. I feel optimistic. Robbi's expressed interest in the past. In fact, I was talking to Robbi about Eric Donovan, and because we had reached out to Eric Donovan when we were doing Mimetic, and he is very close with Eric. They live, nearby, I guess, and they hang out.
Well, I think that they're part of the Portland collective of comic creatives.
He said like, oh yeah, Eric told me that this podcast reached out to him to talk about that. He's like, he's super deep in a project, but I think he's interested. So that's on me for never circling back with Eric. So maybe we'll do an Ohio theme month, and we'll do Eric's book that was like Ghost Stories of Ohio or something, and then we'll do Loving Ohio. It actually wouldn't be that hard to do an Ohio month. It's just, I know that for Gen Z or Gen Alpha, Ohio means crappy. Like it's slang, and it's not very cryptic.
And we have always, as a state of Ohio, we have always been like when quote unquote coastal elites, when they talk about middle America, flyover country, things like that.
Right.
Ohio always comes up because it's like, you don't want to say like Kansas, because Kansas is like farmland to them. Iowa's farmland. Ohio represents to the people who aren't from Ohio represents average. Like,
right.
It's not the middle of nowhere. They've got cities, they've got professional sports teams, they've got, people know where that is. It is literal middle America. It is average. It is the most basic, generic.
One might even say the heart of it all.
Very much so. Yeah.
Self-branded burn. But one thing,
also because Ohio kind of, I think, shaped kind of
looks like a heart.
Too.
Well, this is where the heart would be.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of layers there.
So,
but hey, you know what?
One thing I think that they got correct in this book, though, is that like, you're from Cincinnati. Like, I mean, I know you went to high school here, but you've always been. I have had so many friends move here, or when I moved out of state, or have like even been visiting, and people talk about where I'm from, I always say Cincinnati.
Yep.
And
never said Ohio.
Right. My friends, I have friends from LA. They're like, how come you never say Ohio? And I'm like, well, it's like one deeply ingrained in me that Cincinnati is just distinctly its own place. Yeah. And in this book, they never say we're going to Ohio. We're going to Cincinnati. Cincinnati is the destination. And it's such a particular city that defies classification, and anyone who classifies it is wrong. Because people in Columbus think it's a southern city, and if you've actually been south of the Mason-Dixon line, This is not a southern city, although you do see the influences.
Oh, yeah.
And then, you can say it's a Rust Belt city, but it's quite distinct from other Rust Belt cities. But there is certainly the Rust Belt flavor to it. Yeah. And there are people who say, like, oh, it's like Ohio is a Great Lakes state. And so sometimes it gets lumps in with the Great Lakes region. Yeah. And it's like,
but we're on the river. Yeah.
Exactly. Like, there's the flavor of that. There's certainly the influence. We get lake effect snow. So it's like weirdly, like the weird amalgamation that sits in the crossroads of all of these things. The thing I'm proudest of in Civil War terms, we're the southernmost northern point. Meaning this was the first place you set foot.
Yeah. And there's part
Kentucky
of the reason why the National Underground Railroad Museum is in Cincinnati.
On the banks of the river, where you, as soon as your feet, because the Ohio River belongs to Kentucky, so you have to touch the shore on the Ohio side to be free. Obviously, I'm a big Cincinnati enthusiast. I certainly see the faults and am open to criticism, but I love my city. I don't speak for the state. Again, I did not say I love Ohio.
When I went to school, I went to school in Virginia. When you're out there and, the first month they're there, where are you from, blah, 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 and I'm from Cincinnati. I've never said I'm from Ohio. I've never introduced myself that way as I'm from Ohio.
And like, we don't have conversations about this. Like, I've never talked to another Cincinnatian about how we're not from Ohio, we're from Cincinnati.
No. Well, the joke water. Is we're the Republic of Cincinnati or the city-state of Cincinnati.
Right. Yes, city-state,
Yeah, like that the rest of the state, Columbus and Cleveland are aligned, and they're very much aligned, and they always have been, far more than Cincinnati and Columbus. There's a massive divide when you go, just at some point you cross out of Cincinnati and into Ohio. It's just what it is, you know? So maybe we're a little touchier on this than some other people might be. And the fact that one of the co-authors is from Columbus maybe puts us as natural enemies on certain things, but you never know. But
I actually was a little flattered. I just have that suspicion anytime someone's from Columbus. I know how they like to refer to Cincinnati, and then hilariously, but the last thing I'll say about it is the
characters are from Kentucky, so they're kind of from both sides there. But we'll get into it.
Yeah, but the MLS rivalry between FC Cincinnati and Columbus, there are these very famous signs as you enter Columbus. They are part of the Columbus metro area, and for some reason, they get tagged as Cincinnati from people from Columbus, but they have these like very judgmental signs with the 10 Commandments on the highway on I-71 as you approach Columbus.
As you go
and then
north,
one that says hell is real. And they have used that against Cincinnati forever, even though it's in their city. It's just south of their city as you enter the city. But that now FC Cincinnati has embraced that and just chants hell is real as loud as they can every time Columbus crew comes down here to play.
Well, the matchup is called the Hell is Real Derby. Like it has a name because everyone, you can't not see the sign. So, I
cannot believe some wealthy benefactor in either city or county has not said, how much is it going to take to pull those down and get anything less embarrassing? Cornfields are less embarrassing than those signs, but
I mean, at this point,
now they're an institution.
It is an institution on the highway. But again, so the Cincinnati part of it, we'll get into it. We'll get into some of the ideas of what the world they're presenting in the comic are like, and what Cincinnati represents for them. But there's a lot. As I said, this is a relatively fresh book for both you and I, so there's a lot on our minds here. So we got a lot to dive into next week.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you for listening. This has been a longer intro, but we had a lot of ground to cover, and the most possible ground to cover for 4 issues.
There's a lot there for a one-shot single volume.
And then very cool, if you go to Matt's website, which will have all the links, I think, for these creators in the show notes, and you click on like read his books, instead of taking you to his store, it links you to Hoopla with all of his filter for all his stuff. There's also the shop option. I'll always encourage you to buy this, but all the stuff is on Hoopla. He encourages you to use it, so by all means, we encourage you to use it.
That's rad. That's awesome.
It's super
awesome.
Cool. Yeah, I should have put that at the front of the episode when people were still
that's very cool. We're both big proponents of that. So very cool.
Anyway, thank you for listening. We will see you next week.
Peace.